second, let me start the recording of this. If you will take a minute and on your toolbar at the bottom, find the Q&A button. That is where we're going to take questions throughout this. We won't be monitoring the chat because it tends to fly by really quickly. But the question and answer button is the appropriate place. So if you can find that and just type something in there, that way I know you found that question and answer section. And Crystal, if you want to go to the next slide. Great, I'm seeing some people type in there. They found it. Good morning to all of you. Thank you so much. So my name is Stacy Avery, and I'm the Director of Post-Secondary Preparation Programs, and I want to introduce my colleague, Crystal Garza.
Good morning, I'm Crystal Garza, and I'm the statewide coordinator of college and career readiness school models, particularly focusing on PTECH.
Great, and a few logistical notes, like we just said, feel free to enter your questions and reactions in the question and answer box. We will do a question and answer at the end, but as you think of those questions, please go ahead and type them in as we go through. We'll also follow up with slides and recording, and then all of the materials we posted on the TEA TClass website, which I'm guessing everyone knows where that TClass website is because you registered and were able to join this webinar today. Crystal, go ahead and go to the next slide. Great, so our agenda today is I'm going to provide you with a really brief overview of the Texas COVID Learning Acceleration Supports, or the TClass grants we're offering to schools. I'm going to share some of the goals of the TClass state approved vendor list, or the SAVL is what they're calling it, timelines and key concepts. Then we're going to provide an overview of the PTECH planning and implementation support qualification criteria and application for vendors, and then go into next steps and question and answer. So the TClass is a set of targeted supports with additional state and federal funding aligned to the learning acceleration framework. Again, we're looking at accelerating learning for students due to COVID. School districts, that's what we call LEAs, school districts or local education agencies, will access the TClass funding and supports through a single streamlined application. And it really is meant to be simple because they have a lot of different options to choose from. So there's no need for grant writers, there's easy budget calculations, et cetera, and so forth. Crystal, if you want to go to the next screen. So this is the big picture overview that TClass overall, with all the decision points, is going to provide $1.4 billion in services and supports for districts. There's actually a little more than 15 different customized initiatives for learning acceleration, and districts access it in one single application. So the 5 accelerated learning strategies include strategic planning, instructional materials, teacher pipeline, more time, and then innovative school models. As you can see from this slide, within each of those 5 accelerated learning strategies, there are different activities and decisions is what we're calling them that school districts can choose from. And within some decisions, there are more than one. Today, we are focusing on decision 9, and that is PTECH. So the purpose of the TClass state approved vendor list is to evaluate and approve vendors who will work with districts receiving supports through TClass. Not every single decision has a state approved vendor list, but through TClass, districts will work with vendors approved either through in-kind support from TEA or directly with grant funds awarded through this application. And also those vendors will provide districts a guidance document, we provide districts a guidance document that aligns to the design of the application with all the vendor information, including the qualification criteria, qualified vendors, and profiles of each vendors. So let me just take a minute to say, if you want to go back one, Crystal, with PTECH, TEA will be assigning a vendor for those campuses that come in to the PTECH network through the TClass grant application. Once we know the number of schools and we've evaluated those of you that come in through this state approved vendor list, then we anticipate awarding funds directly to the vendors to support the PTECH planning and implementation campuses. Go ahead and go to the next slide. TEA will include the state approved vendor list for some main decision points within here. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So there are some previously qualified vendors doing it via the TEA process, and we actually have one for PTECH. And then we are soliciting more vendors in anticipation of the number of schools that will be coming in. So it's kind of a two-step process, and we'll explain that more in just a little bit. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Crystal. So before we dive specifically into the PTECH planning and implementation specifics, it's critical that I lay the foundation for our work to make sure we all understand the work of the college and career readiness school models. PTECH is one of our college and career readiness school models. Next slide, please. So one more click. Why this work is important. I'm hoping that some of you on this call have seen this slide before. This is TEA's mission and vision, that every child is prepared for success in college, a career, or the military. And we have 4 strategic priorities to do that. We are focusing with PTECH on connecting high school to career and college, and ensuring that we have rigor in district and campus academic performance. One more click. We are also in alignment with the Higher Ed Coordinating Board's goal of ensuring 60 by 30, that we have 60% of our workforce with a credential by 2030. And believe it or not, 2030 is just around the corner. And so our college and readiness school models support this work. They are high school programs that deliver on the promise of rigorous college and career opportunities and training that provide advanced academic opportunities for students. So that's what we're doing in all 3 of our models. So this, is a big picture of our network. Our college and career readiness school model network has existed for quite some time now. We actually started back in 2004, 2005 with early colleges, and a few years later we added TSTEM, actually a few months later, and after the 2019 legislative session we added the PTECH model. Currently, we are just short of 500 high school campuses across the state implementing one of these models. Last year, TEA issued a competitive request for applications to select a technical assistance provider for that network. And currently, you can see on our slide, we do have a technical assistance provider that is supporting our existing campuses in this. Crystal, click one more time for me. What we are doing with this state approved vendor list solicitation and qualification is we are seeking to find additional vendors to support our new PTECH campuses that are coming in through the TClass application. This process is to identify and select vendors to support any of those campuses. We have been asked how many technical assistance providers we are looking for, and at this time I don't have a specific answer. It depends on several factors. Number one, how many campuses come in through the PTECH planning and implementation grant through TClass, and number two, how many vendors respond to this application and are qualified to do the work in supporting our PTECH campuses. Next slide. Wanted to give you a big picture overview of our network and where we stand now so you can see the scope, because I think that's critical foundation for our work. So for the 22-23 school year, we have about 473 campuses in our network, either in planning or implementation. 93 of those are TSTEMs, 166 are PTECHs, and 214 are early college high schools. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is a high-level overview of the goals of each of these models. And one more click, Crystal. And again, we are focusing only on PTECH planning and implementation that comes in through the TClass application for schools. So the PTECH Blueprint is our guiding document. And so if you have not looked at the PTECH Blueprint, I would encourage you to go to TEA's website, just do a quick search for PTECH, and you will find a copy of our PTECH Blueprint. The blueprint ensures fidelity of implementation to the model and includes 6 benchmarks, which we'll talk about in a minute, and our outcomes-based measures in access, achievement, and attainment. This blueprint is the guiding document, so any vendor selected through this process will be guided by the blueprint and will be supporting campuses to plan for during the planning portion and implement the requirements of the blueprint during their grant period. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So here are the design elements of the PTECH Blueprint, and you can see, I'm not going to read each of these to you, but we look at how do they set up their school. So any vendor that is selected to support will be helping schools determine how are they going to set up their school. Is it going to be a standalone campus, a school within a school, helping them figuring out recruitment, admission, and enrollment, helping them with their strategic alliances. Who is their IHE partner? Who is their MOU partner? For business and industry, or working with them on that MOU with their business and industry, ensuring that they have rigorous courses and crosswalks with their IHE, and they have the right courses to get those post-secondary outcomes, such as an associate degree, a certificate, or an industry certification. Helping them figure out the work-based learning with their business partners, and that work-based learning occurs at every single grade level, and helping them figure out the wraparound strategies and services that students will need to be successful in the PTECH model. So I just wanted to give you some background on how campuses have historically entered. New campuses could either apply for a planning year designation, or one more click, Crystal, they could apply for grants for planning and implementation. So these PTECH campuses will be entering our network because they would be applying for the TClass planning and implementation grant. All of our current campuses have an annual application process, and then every year we release to them an outcomes-based measures report that talks about the access, achievement, and attainment of the students that they are supporting on that PTECH campus. So our existing technical assistance provider provides these 4 levels of support for our early colleges, PTECH and T-STEM. They provide campus level support and leadership coaching, events and convening. We currently have an annual summit that draws about 1,000 individuals, along with regional convenings and then various convenings to meet the needs of our campuses. We have a robust network and robust community of practice and a variety of tools and resources. One more click, Crystal. What we are looking for with this state-approved vendor list is any vendor that is selected and qualified will be providing campus-level support and leadership coaching, and also providing tools and resources. Whoever's selected will be collaborating with our existing vendor, because we don't want to run multiple events and convening by multiple vendors, so that's going to be retained with our current technical assistance provider. So again, through this process, we're looking for campus level support and leadership coaching and tools and resources to support the blueprint and the campuses moving into that. As I turn this over to Crystal to walk you through the more specifics about the PTECH planning and implementation and see the actual questions and what we're looking for in some examples, I want you to think about several things. Any vendor that is selected will have to demonstrate through their application how they have the background and expertise to support campuses in the PTECH model using the PTECH Blueprint, and then another tool we have called the Roadmap to Opening. The vendor will also have to demonstrate the capacity to support the campus and the campus leaders and their leadership team In the planning portion, which is almost 2 years, through the first year of implementation, and implementation means serving with students in the 23-24 school year. We'll have to make sure that the vendor through this process has the expertise to provide feedback to campuses on their planning and implementation and help provide interventions to those campuses to make sure they are on track to be successful when they implement with students, and also providing TEA feedback and reports. The selected vendor will also need to demonstrate through the application how they have the ability to manage the project effectively. And any selected vendor will have to demonstrate in their budget section that it's aligned to the supported activities that they describe, that all expenses are reasonable and necessary to carry out the project. As you listen through today, your budget should also demonstrate how many campuses you believe you have the capacity to serve, and build your budget in that manner. And while we don't have a question that specifically asks how many campuses you can serve, you need to ensure that you include that in your budget so we know what your capacity is. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Crystal Garza.
Thank you, Stacey. That was a great segue for a lot of things to consider as you're planning to fill in this application. That was a really great breakdown of what you should be thinking about. So the next couple of slides we'll be going through are definitely application minded. And again, the application is very tied to our expectations of what we would like technical assistance to look like, specifically for our PTECH planning and implementation campuses that will be coming in. So again, we are focusing on what are you offering as a vendor for the technical assistance for planning and implementation campuses completely new and green to the PTECH model, and your support through this funding. So again, just emphasizing that the technical assistance is anchored on that singular goal of these supports to campuses that are completely new to PTECH through the TClass grant funded for these LEAs. We're expecting that the support that you would potentially be providing would be establishing the foundational elements of PTECH. So at the beginning of this, we mentioned the greater network, things like the blueprint, which is the guiding document, which are all critical to the support that you will be providing to these new PTECH campuses. We're also expecting that these campuses implement and serve students regionally, and that's very critical, in the high wage, high demand, high skill pathways that are specific to their region. So we're guiding these campuses through intentionally opening up pathways for these students, and that they're setting up opportunities for them to graduate with credentials for post-secondary success. So that's a lot packed into PTECH, and we're going to go in a little bit further how PTECH technical assistance is broken down. So at a much larger scale, we're definitely looking for feedback for programmatic improvement, and that's broken into two types of support, which is the launch support, which would be planning. The campuses would be in a planning phase for about 2 years, just shy of that 2-year mark, but they'll be in planning for a substantial amount of time before they begin serving students in that 23-24 school year. So you potentially you would be working with campuses that have a lot of runway to set up all of the elements for PTECH, like those MOUs, work-based learning, and making sure that they are doing it with fidelity to their region. So like I mentioned, launch support is one of the components of the application, as well as how you plan on implementing technical assistance once the students are served. Another part of the technical assistance expectation is the project management component of the overall funding provided, as well as the budgetary items that come along with it. So these are the 4 categories, and you'll see them as you complete the application as well. So in the upcoming slides, we will have a breakdown of the questions from the guidance document, what we're looking for. And of course, if you have Q&A, please put them in as we go through so we can make sure to answer those questions appropriately as they go in. So that first section for launch support, again, 21, 22, these campuses that do receive the PTECH planning and implementation will be notified of their award in September. So we're definitely looking for quick support, quick and sturdy support for these new campuses as they're going to be starting their journey in the early fall and continuing through 2023. So a little bit of a logistical note, the language at the top in red, you can consider that one of the expectations of the technical assistance. So part of this launch strategy is for us to know that the vendor has a plan for successfully launching and scaling these new PTECH programs through their first graduating cohort. And we know you'll be working with them for 3 years, 2 planning, 1 for their 9th grade year. And so we do have the intention that you leave them with a lasting plan for sustainability through their graduating cohort. So getting into the questions specifically, and again, this is taken directly from the guidance document. If you haven't had a chance to look at it more closely, we'll be going into it line item by line item. Hopefully we can get to all of them. So the first being making sure that you have a logic model for launching these PTECHs. And through that, we want to make sure that we know that you have evidence of a clear understanding of the PTECH model and how they launch. Like Stacy mentioned, we do have the blueprint and the roadmap to opening as our tools currently. So we want to see that you do have a model for supporting these campuses through PTECH from the beginning and through your time with them. We want to make sure that you're describing the different supports that you intend to pinpoint for these individual PTECH campuses and ensuring that they're fully prepared. And again, like I mentioned, we do have guiding documents that we already use. And so making sure that you understand that those are definitely important and how can you help supplement those resources for our campuses that are currently going to be new. And lastly, we want to make sure that you're describing how you'll assist those campuses through work-based learning experiences, and how it's aligned to labor market needs. One thing across the state of Texas that's always kind of been really talked about is those work-based learning experiences and how to implement them, especially when you're partnering with business and industry. So lots of little details in these questions, but in terms of the look-fors, again, understanding the PTECH model and the Texas PTECH model, and that Texas is a really wide state and there will be differing practices across the state as well. So evidence that you understand that, and that you understand that there is a gap to be bridged when you're dealing with multiple partners like K-12 employers and institutions of higher education. Overarching, and I think this will be probably a trend throughout the rest of the questions, is specific details for how you might carry out the project and maybe how you've carried out other projects to provide some evidence of that. A timeline of activities leading to launch into the 23-24 school year, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the logic model that we're expecting, and a couple of samples of tools and materials you've used with detail and represent high quality, because again, we want to be able to give these campuses the resources they need so that they can plan as efficiently as they can, because with TClass, they are getting a substantial amount of money. So again, calling out that expectation at the top, providing on-demand leadership coaching for PTECH campuses and planning. And just to speak more to that, I think that campuses really thrive through conversation and guidance from definitely coaches that are really there and have done the work and have done other kinds of work. Maybe it's CTE driven, but they really thrive with that, which is why we're definitely emphasizing the leadership coaching component of the PTECH campuses and planning. So our question is, we would like for you to describe the support that you intend to provide to PTECH leaders and their leadership teams. If anyone's unfamiliar with that term on the call, our PTECHs do have leadership teams that help them decide the directions and also the day-to-day of how a PTECH campus should be run. And that this will be provided through the planning year, again, those 2 years. And some examples of how you would timeline out some of these tasks and activities provided through leadership coaching specifically. So some of the things we're looking for in terms of leadership coaching for our campuses, again, some specific details for the project, specific activities that you would include, or sufficient information that you have provided. Certain information like this before is also very helpful. A big one, again, is the timeline for activities, because we know that these campus leaders have a lot going on, and at the base of it, they're serving students, and they will serve students if they aren't already, as they're trying to build out this campus. So that timeline will be critical. And the ability to demonstrate the knowledge of successful coaching and support for campuses and districts. Like I mentioned, campuses and districts really thrive on that communication and having a source to go to and ask their questions of. So this is definitely a critical expectation. And we wanted to provide some sample activities for the PTECH planning technical assistance, specifically for launch support. So these are some of the items that are some samples of the activities. It's not the limit. But some of these are recruit and identify PTECH campus leaders, convening the leadership teams, collaborating with local workforce boards. Personally, I have noticed that we collaborate once with the workforce board and maybe knock on their door a handful of other times. So that's an important one that might not always be used. Identifying the IHE partners, of course, regionally, all these different college and university partners throughout the state. Our campuses are expected to use data analysis to make sure that they are programming their courses in PTECH the way they should be and aligned to their pathway. Identifying the business and industry partner, which can always be tricky, especially for those rural campuses. Developing and implementing teacher recruitment plans, student plans, marketing. Sustainability plan is a huge piece of that, and planning to meet the blueprint requirements and OBMs, which outline a lot of these activities. Drafting MOUs with business and industry, and developing and convening an advisory board. So that's quite a bit of items and a long laundry list of just sample activities for what a PTECH planning year would be an expectation to complete all of these activities. So giving you an idea of what kind of support these campuses need at the within those 2 years of being a vendor. So the second component of this is the actual implementation phase of technical assistance. So at this point, the campuses will begin serving students. Again, in red is the expectation. So we expect that these campuses will have improved and maintained the fidelity of implementation to the PTECH Blueprint. So the question would be very similar to the planning initially, is what would be your model for implementation support for these particular PTECH campuses? They've spent 2 years with your logic model. And what's your expectation for that 1 year for that launch? Because 1 year can definitely make or break the success of the program, especially for districts and boards. They want to see the success and their gains so far through the planning year. So some of the things we are looking for is, again, that evidence of understanding the PTECH model. There's phases, which is why we call it planning and implementation. It's different when you plan in theory and execute in implementation. The evidence for clear understanding for that bridging the gap between K-12 employers and IHEs. Again, that there is that gap to be bridged. And when you start serving students, whether that's dual credit or begin work-based learning, and your employer provides that, it's a tricky thing to navigate within your first year. And of course, making sure that you have standards and design that's appropriate to the first year of implementation. Again, calling out that red piece, providing on-campus leadership coaching for PTECH campuses during implementation. So the question being, how would you support these leaders and leadership teams? Because again, it's not just one person, it's a whole community that comes to build these PTECHs. How would you provide the support while they're beginning to start recruiting, implementing students, and serving students in their initial year? And if providing examples and a timeline of the major tasks and activities that would be provided from a coaching lens. What are some of the points of implementing this PTECH campus that you would hone in on from a leadership coaching perspective? So some of the things we're looking for, again, are some of those specific activities of how campus leaders would be supported, a timeline of activities, of course, because again, I mentioned at this point, they're not just planning to plan, they're planning to implement at this point. And a demonstrated knowledge of coaching support and sample tools and materials that are of high quality. So some sample activities that some of our LEAs do go through, and that would be an expectation, that support of that PTECH campus leader. A lot of the different leaders come from different backgrounds, different expectations, different positions in being a building level leader. So how will the support for that leader in that new year, or maybe it's not their first year being a principal. So that is very critical to pinpoint in terms of technical assistance. Convening that leadership team, because again, it isn't just the leader. There are lots of different decision makers on the team, such as CTE directors, counselors, IHE partners, different liaisons. So how are you going to advise to make adjustments as needed? Because there's definitely always adjustments that happen during a school year. Convening that PTECH advisory board, keeping in mind that how many advisory boards does a campus need, how many different PTECH or CTE programs of study will be offered, and how many advisory boards are appropriate, are different questions that you might have to keep in mind as you provide technical assistance to these campuses. How will you use data analysis as campuses come closer to be held to our outcomes-based measures, which is our data that we use for continuous improvement, and mid-course corrections? Monitoring those partnerships, because again, it usually, you know, partnerships can come, go, needed in maybe the first year, not the second year, especially with dual credit, you might not offer it right away. So keeping those partners engaged and making sure that they have an understanding. Continuing to build out work-based learning, because now it will be in practice as opposed to planning for that practice. Refining the course crosswalk, because adjustments will definitely be made throughout the time as a PTECH or any of our CCRSM models. Monitoring and adjusting the training of professional development. So a component for implementation that's incredibly different from planning is adding in that teaching or dual credit faculty element into your technical assistance that you're providing. And adjusting student recruitment, because recruiting for the first year might not look the same for the second year. So those are some of the sample activities that are expected of our LEAs and that are expected to be supported through technical assistance. So our third section for feedback for programmatic improvement throughout the life of the vendor funding. At the top in red, deploying formative and summative assessments for campus leadership teams to identify gaps in fidelity, document campus-based strengths and challenges, identify capacity challenges, and synthesize leadership priorities for technical assistance. So in this world we live in, there's so much data points, and you know, a conversation definitely in coaching is also a data point where we're learning more about what the campus needs to facilitate the challenges and provide and rise to that occasion so that they can strengthen their weaknesses as well. So assessments are definitely a big component of this. For the question specifically for the application, we want you to describe the kinds of assessments that you would provide for campus leadership so that they can continue to seek out programmatic improvement. And at a minimum, how often would you provide formative/summative assessments? What would you potentially put into these assessments of the content, and identify some recommendations for next steps? So really fully thinking through, I'm going to assess them. How many times does it make sense to assess them? Remembering that the academic calendar is kind of our backdrop here. What would you ask them for? The content is very different from planning to implementation. And what are the recommendations afterwards? You've got the data, now what are you going to do with it? So some of the pieces that we're looking for is that quality of assessments that you're proposing. That's huge with TEA as a whole, and of course with our CCRSM network. What's the timeline? Again, reminding you that we are set against an academic calendar backdrop for peaks and valleys of times that it would be appropriate. And what is your data collection system? How are you going to collect all of this assessment information? Demonstrating that you have a means to monitor that technical assistance to improve the fidelity of the components that we're holding them against, which is the PTECH Blueprint, and supporting those campuses in meeting the outcomes-based measures. So as Stacy mentioned previously, we do have data collections, which we call outcomes-based measures, that we use to provide to them for continuous improvement. So relating this back to the application, we would like for you to describe how the campus will monitor that fidelity of implementation with attention to that blueprint and roadmap to opening, and how you will measure, how that will be measured and taken into consideration for those mid-course corrections. So it's all kind of married together where we're talking about, we have assessments, we have a coaching model, and what are we going to do to provide that support for mid-course corrections? And the next question is describing how that data will be used to drive those continuous cycles of improvement and make sure that campus leaders understand how to use the information and data that you're collecting and we're collecting to improve the systems and promote student success. So you'll be planning through those 2 years, but there is definitely a lot of data to collect within those 2 years. We want to make sure that there's a quality and intention to how you intend to tie the monitoring plan to the rest of the technical assistance as well. And then the final expectation in red for the feedback component of this application is completing an annual review of PTECH campuses and developing a program improvement plan with priorities and strategies identified for ongoing programmatic improvement. And I think the biggest takeaway from that is that annual review piece, because you're doing assessments and mid-course corrections throughout, but we want to do also a holistic view of the PTECH campus health from planning in 2 years into implementation. So the question here would be describing the regular progress reports and annual review that TEA will be provided, including at a minimum status reports of each PTECH campus with strengths and challenges, and a timeline for gathering that data and reporting it back to TEA. Because we all at TEA, we are also the thought partner for these feedbacks and mid-course corrections at any point throughout this vendor funding. And we were looking for that quality of annual reports. And for this, quality definitely means intention of what you would report up for TEA. One of our final components is the project management aspect of this. So demonstrating that there is a proven track record of managing large-scale technical assistance projects. As Stacy showed from the growth of the network, we do have a rather large network, and that doesn't include the number of partners, business and industry and IHE partners, as well as local regional workforce boards. So we do have a large scale of stakeholders. And so we want to make sure that there's a demonstration of a track record of managing these kinds of projects and building the bridge for all of these different systems. So the question for this slide is describing any previous large-scale technical assistance, like was mentioned, including any results that were achieved from any previous projects. We do want to see that, and what we're looking for is that quality of the evidence relating to the ability to manage and provide services for large-scale technical assistance. So this final one under project management, we would like the expectation to be that there is a demonstrated extensive experience that the vendor has in building the capacity of campus leaders, districts, community stakeholders, business partners, and IHE partners to improve student success. And the question for this one is, describe the qualifications of personnel that will be involved in providing technical assistance to these PTECH planning and implementation campuses. So what we're looking for in this particular question are the personnel qualifications, appropriate backgrounds. We know that there's so many different stakeholders within this web of the network, and we just want to make sure that the combination of who you're suggesting fits into our programmatic profile for academics, management, or the technical skills required to coach some of these campuses that are PTECH. And the evidence of proposers' ability to engage external partners and build capacity to successfully implement PTECH. So if it hasn't been emphasized enough, our stakeholders run the gamut from even just community stakeholders and advisory boards that aren't necessarily the direct business partners. So there's a very delicate amount of people involved with making sure that PTECH is successful. And our last item is our budget that goes through the start of the 2021 year through the academic year 2024. So budget management. One of the expectations is that the tasks and activities that you will be proposing will be sufficient to ensure the project goals and that they are achieved on the timeline. And again, there's timeline again. It's very important that we understand when activities or coaching may take place or when a resource might be developed. So the question is to make sure to download that budget template and that you're describing proposed costs appropriately by the task and activity for each fiscal year. So this fiscal year 22, 23, and 24. What we're looking for in these budgets is that they are appropriately aligned with the major program objectives and requirements. So if you have a team of people working on this, you want to make sure that whomever filled out the application questions prior to this in the first three, they know what to put into the costs and services and that they're appropriately aligned to what was proposed for the coaching, the feedback, and the launch and support and implementation. So we're going to go ahead and, oh, go ahead, Stacy.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we're kind of running short on time. So we're not going to walk you through the application because Crystal has really gone over all of the questions in the application. I'm going to answer some questions. Crystal, if you want to bring up the budget template really quick to show. If not, I can bring that up. But we've got some questions. So one of them says, will these slides be posted? Yes, they'll be posted on the TClass website. So please go there, give them some time to process the recording. We've had about, oh gosh, like 12 to 15 webinars this week. So they're posting as fast as they can. We've got some other great questions saying, will these new technical assistance providers be able to participate in the leadership summit and the other regional convenings? And the short answer is yes. You will definitely be invited, and we still kind of need to figure all of that out, how exactly that will work. But our intent is not to exclude you. Our intent is to include you. What we don't want happening is this leadership conference and a separate conference and a separate conference. We want all of our network included in the convenings, and that's why they are going to continue to go with our technical assistance provider. Please remember, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A section, because that's how we capture them for the frequently asked questions. Another question is, if we have limitations on a part of the state we can support, or what type of districts we can support, should we include that in our application? Yes, please do include any of that relevant information. For example, if you say we can only serve PTECHs in the El Paso area, you need to include that in the El Paso, that you need to include that in your definition for us. So give us as much information. You do have limited space in that application, so you're going to have to be really concise. I recommend typing it up in Word and then going through it to make sure you don't exceed the character limits, because it will cut you off. We've also got a question: does the form tool allow for attachments? It does not. So if you have those attachments up on a website, I would recommend that in the narrative, you go ahead and list the website where you have those attachments, so that as we're evaluating, we could go look at those, but you can't add anything else. I see something in chat. Michelle, if you could put that in the Q&A so we can capture that for the FAQs. On-demand coaching means if the school leadership, and again, Amy, if you would please put your questions in the Q&A rather than the chat, that would be great. So on-demand coaching is when the leadership coach needs, when the campus needs assistance from their technical assistance provider, they can reach out and say, we need some assistance, would you come and please help us? And you're adjusting to make sure that you can do that. Crystal, I don't know if you want to make that a little bit bigger, and if you want to go over the budget template, or you want me to talk about it.
No, I do want to make a note that the budget template is not on the TEA website, but once you go through the application, you will be prompted to download the budget workbook to fill out. So just some high level information for the workbook and for the general information. There is a 21, 22, and 22, 23 fiscal year budget tab. And it is sorted into launch support, implementation, technical assistance, feedback for programmatic improvement, project management. So the categories that we spoke about in the question by question section, you would be inserting what this subtask would be, or what you're proposing, what deliverable type it would be, the estimated completion date, and that cost, if it is in fiscal year 22 versus fiscal year 23, we would want you to outline that, as well as any activities that fall under this subtask. And it looks the same for the 23-24 fiscal year, where we have the 1, 2, 3, 4 tasks with the subtasks and activities describing what the deliverable type is, the completion date, and the cost. Was there anything you wanted to mention, Stacy?
No, the question has come up again, and I know we talked about it early on. How do we estimate how many campuses we can serve? Please include that in your narrative, and even in your activities where you're describing each. We can serve 10 campuses in the El Paso area only. We can serve statewide 100 campuses. Like, you need to tell us what you can serve, because we don't necessarily know your organization or your capacity. So it's really critical that you give us that information. Let me look through. So one more question, because there is an 11 o'clock webinar using this same account. So we're going to get bumped out here in just a minute. But the question says, the majority of this appears to be focused on process and structure. May we also address instruction such as planning for project-based learning? So one of our blueprint requirements is curriculum, instruction, and assessment. So I don't know, Crystal, if you want to talk a little more about that.
Yeah, so that speaks a little bit more to the courses of study and how they will be implemented course by course. Specifically for project-based learning, for PTECH, that might fall into either curriculum and instruction or work-based learning, depending. But yeah.
So yes, definitely, and propose that within your application, specifically what your activities are going to be, because that the more information you can give us in a concise manner, the more information we have to make decisions. If you have any additional questions, please put them in the question Q&A section right now. We will be releasing an FAQ shortly after this webinar, and again, we'll place it up on the website with the rest of the information. We really look forward to reading your applications, excited to hear what the different proposals will be. Crystal, do you have any final closing comments?
Oh, I was on mute for a second. No, I just, I think definitely the breakdowns of the questions and thinking about it from the perspective of growing these PTECH campuses from when they're in planning for 2 years, navigating all of those elements they have to put into place and considering how they're going to implement in that first year with a substantial amount of money. That's definitely key. Here. They have a lot of activities and tasks to kind of structure for themselves, so it'll be really important for them to have dedicated PTECH guidance.
Definitely. Sorry for interrupting, Crystal. I think my internet froze for a minute. Do you want to put up the slide with the email address before we log off so that if anyone has any additional questions, please send them to the TClass email address, and there it is for you. And make sure you jot that down, take a picture of the screen real quick. And thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. We look forward to reading your applications.